Good day, and welcome to Reaping the Rewards of Rapid Team Notifications. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you experience technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please dial 1-866-229-3239, or you can message the WebEx producer using the QA panel. During the presentation, all participants will remain in listen-only mode. As a reminder, this event is being recorded for rebroadcast. We encourage you to submit written questions at any time during the presentation using the QA panel located at the bottom right of your screen. After typing your questions in the space at the bottom, hit the Send button, and please be sure to direct your questions towards all panelists in the drop-down menu. Your questions will not be seen by other members of the audience and will be addressed, time permitting, towards the end of our session. Also, towards the end of our session, we will have a polling question appear on your screen. Please take a moment to select your answers and click the Submit button to share your response. Now, I'm pleased to turn the call over to your host today, Leanne Myers.
Good afternoon, and thank you for logging in for today's installment of PerfectServe's Thought Leadership webinar series. I do want to take a minute and share the agenda for today's event. We will begin by giving you a quick 5-minute overview of PerfectServe, and then we will quickly hand the call over to our guest speakers, who are two successful program managers of trauma centers. We will be sure to save time for a dedicated question and answer. This will be your opportunity to ask any questions of our speakers. As Sean mentioned, you can submit your questions via the Q&A box on your screen. We are committed to wrapping up in 1 hour. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Terry Edwards is the founder and president and CEO of PerfectServe. PerfectServe's clinical communications platform is used by leading U.S. health systems to improve patient outcomes and operational efficiency. Alongside Terry today is Joanne Barrington. Joanne has been trauma program manager at Providence Hospital since December of 2012. She previously served in the same role at POH Regional Medical Center in Pontiac, Michigan for 8 years. Joanne holds an MBA and a BSN in nursing and is very active in the Michigan Trauma Coalition. She also serves as director and instructor for various trauma nursing courses. Chris McKeechan has been trauma program manager at Henry Ford Macomb Hospital since 2009. Previously, she worked at Beaumont Hospital in Troy as both a clinical nurse specialist and a trauma program manager. Chris is a registered nurse, a paramedic, and also serves as an instructor and course director for multiple paramedic, nursing, and trauma programs. We're very excited to be able to share their story today, and I'd like to thank all three of you for being with us. At this time, I'm going to turn the call over to Terry to kick things off. Terry?
Thank you, Leanne, and welcome everybody. We're delighted to have you with us for this program today. So I'm going to briefly answer the question of what is PerfectServe and what do we do real quickly, so you have some reference point for the solutions that have been deployed at Henry Ford and St. John Providence. So at a very high level, PerfectServe is a communications and collaboration platform that is focused on uniting physicians, nurses, and other care team members across the continuum and then facilitating timely interaction between them. So in terms of what we do and the high-level benefits that we provide, this depends somewhat on who you are. So when we think about PerfectServe as it relates to physicians, we're able to provide them with personal algorithms based on their preferences and as well as their work group structure to appropriately filter and deliver pertinent information and drive communication to them based upon where, when, and how they work. For nurses and other care team members, PerfectServe knows which physicians and other care team members to reach, which makes it easy for them to quickly connect with the right person in the right way. And then for health system executives who are funding and sponsoring initiatives where PerfectServe may be involved, we allow their organizations to address the widest variety of communication workflows and use cases across all stakeholders, which is really critical to driving maximum clinician adoption. When we drive maximum clinician adoption of a solution, we're able to have a meaningful impact on the quality and operational improvements that are critical to today's organizations moving forward, as well as minimizing HIPAA compliance risk. We currently serve more than 45,000 physicians and thousands of other care team members across more than 100 hospitals, as well as 13,000 ambulatory care practices and post-acute provider organizations. And to understand the problem that we're addressing, we'll start by taking a quick look at the typical or status quo nurse-to-physician communications process. So what you see here is a spaghetti map of the status quo nurse-to-physician communication contact process as it exists in most hospitals across the country today. Now, this was actually a before mapping that we made at a specific PerfectServe hospital client site before we deployed, but we have created variations of this same map at many other facilities around the country, and the outcome is pretty much the same. I know you can't read all the little boxes here, but if you could, what you would see is a process that first off has a lot of steps, we can see that, but you'd also see that it has a lot of decision points and communication handoffs, each which creates an opportunity for the process to break down and create a delay. And you'll also see a number of actors involved in the process as well. But moving forward here to the next slide, what you can see is what the process looks like after PerfectServe has been deployed. We have dramatically reduced the steps, the handoffs, and the decision points, as well as the number of actors. And we would think that that might have an impact on the overall cycle time. So let's compare that. This slide shows the actual nurse-to-physician communications cycle time in minutes. And each one of those orange bars represents one communications event. And this event measured the time from when a nurse needed to connect with the physician until the physician was able to respond. And you can see that the average time in this case was about 46 minutes with a 10-minute median. But what is also concerning is that about a third of these, in more than a third of the cases, the time was greater than 30 minutes. Now, one thing, moving forward then, Wendy, go back to that previous slide one more time. There's one more point I wanted to make. Thank you. One thing that I wanted to point out about this that I failed to mention before we move forward here is that what's important to understand is that in the average 300-bed hospital, the nurses will go through this process some 500 to 700 times each day. 500 to 700 times each day in the course of providing care. And these communication events are about the care delivery process. And they range in urgency from things such as, I need you right away, to you probably need to know about this before you round in the morning. So urgency varies, but importance, they are all very, very important. So moving forward here, we can go to the next slide, Wendy. This is what the response time looked like after PerfectServe was deployed. You can see that we reduced the average by more than 2/3, and we reduced the median by 40%. And what's difficult to see on the right-hand side is that we also doubled the number of communication events that were completed in 2 minutes or less, and we reduced by more than 2/3 the events that were taking more than 30 minutes. So you can even see visually how that fat tail has been greatly reduced. So today's topic is about notifying teams in the trauma process. And what we've been looking at here is the problem of just one nurse connecting with one doctor. And as you consider communicating with a team, it becomes one to many. And the complexity of that can be dramatically increased. And so at the heart of PerfectServe's platform is really automating complex processes and ensuring that people can connect in a timely manner. And so that's what the Team Alert capabilities allows. So I'm going to pause right here with that background and turn this over to Leanne to go to the next stage in our call. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Terry. Your PerfectServe overview was definitely helpful in setting the stage as Joanne and Chris tell us about the success they have had in each of their trauma centers. The world of trauma centers is very serious business. Traumatic events claim the lives of millions each year, and our speakers today work very hard to reduce that number and manage their centers to respond quickly to the unexpected and provide the best care possible. I'm now going to turn things over to Joanne, Trauma Program Manager at Providence Hospital, to tell us about the great work that they are doing. Joanne?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Leanne said, I am from Providence Hospital in Southfield, Michigan. We're a very highly populated area north of Detroit and part of the Ascension Health System. We have 6 hospitals within our St. John Providence system in the immediate area. We're near the end of our process of becoming a Level 2 trauma center, and I have set up a Level 2 trauma center prior to this as well. So I know how important it is, how critical it is to have communication set up once you start activating for traumas. Now, the challenges that we faced here were bringing a team together. This is the same challenge that a lot of people have at lots of places, and being able to contact people in a number of different ways. We have an in-house phone system here. There's pagers. A few people, when we first started this, were using cell phones, but not very many. When we first started also, and I'll go into a little bit more, we started with operator-assisted burst pages, and they were very ineffective. We found that there were parts of the hospital that were not conducive to the phones and the pagers. There were a lot of dead areas. One of the worst dead areas, unfortunately, was our trauma office. So it was very difficult when we were getting calls from the nurses from the floor for activations and everything, and being able to hear and understand everything that was going on. So we started looking and exploring what our options were to that operator-assisted program. And we also needed something that was secure, and we didn't have to have concerns about the HIPAA violations if we wanted to talk directly about patients. So our big aha moment was when we were using the operator-assisted program, and one of our surgeons, who was the only one who lives almost across the street and takes a call from outside the hospital, did not receive any calls at all for an entire night. Luckily, we have in-house residents, and that resident was able to reach him and to get that message to him, and he was able to respond, but there were great delays, and that was one of the really big issues that we were looking at. We started our implementation in October of 2013, and because of the inefficiencies, we actually tracked time on some of them. And from the radio call coming in to having to notify the operator getting the message out, and the message getting to people was anywhere from a 2 to 10 minute delay. And in trauma, anybody who's been involved with trauma, if you're activating for a serious trauma, your trauma surgeons may only have 15 minutes to get in and arrive within the ER within that amount of time, which is what our situation was. So in January, we began looking into other options and started voice paging through PerfectServe. PerfectServe was already used by our hospital, but only on the direct contact and the nurse-physician level, not in group-type levels. That we had some issues with that as well, and with not being able to understand some of the people who were giving that information, and the calls, again, with occasional dead spots with the phones that were being used, the in-house phone systems. So we very rapidly, in February, put things together for the online paging system, and by March of 2014, we're completely on that system. So the way that our system works is the radio call comes into the ED, or the patient comes through our triage area. We have nurses who do all of the activations by the ACS, American College of Surgeons, trauma activation criteria, and they actually activate through PerfectServe. So they get the radio call, or a patient walks in or gets dropped off and is badly injured. They have the PerfectServe icon on their desktop computers that are sitting right in front of them. They click on it, they pull up their favorites, and trauma is right at the top of that. So they're able to select the level of trauma that they want to send. They put in information, which is valuable, really just invaluable to us. Everything from the reason that the patient is there, whether that be a fall, a gunshot wound, a motor vehicle, or a pedestrian accident, an assault, any of those things. The age of the patient, which they just put in a number. Gender, which again is just male, female. Blood pressure, if they know it. They can skip by any of these if they don't know. The ETA of the patient. We wanted to have some idea, and those of you who are in trauma understand when we talk about what the GCS is. And that's the level of alertness that gives us an idea of how injured the patient could possibly be. Our EMS does not give us that information very often, so we made it real easy for them and gave them a drop down there as well. So they put in alert, confused, or unresponsive. And then they have a free text area called Chief Complaint where they can put in things like motor vehicle crash at 70 miles an hour into a pole, or fall down a flight of stairs, or whatever that situation might be. So we're actually getting very valuable information. And all of our physicians are put into this and receive it. Some receive it on alpha pagers. Everyone receives it on their cell phones as text. So all of this information is being given and it comes through almost immediately. We did do some timing on those as well when we first started it. And our time, instead of that 2 to 10 minutes of going through, for the most part, when we first started, was about a minute to a minute and a half. Right now, I would say the majority of ours are under a minute. So our surgeons and everyone receives the alert all at the same time, which is great, because it's not only the surgeon, the resident, but it's the lab, it's radiology for both CT, for the portable radiology if they happen to be in another area of the ER, that they can come immediately for our blood bank. If they have something that's penetrating with a low blood pressure, they know to get their blood products ready for potential need, as well as the OR to get an OR prepared. So the flow and the process of getting our patients to where they need to be in the optimal amount of time is very, very effective and efficient. So every activation is can be sent to people as well. So you can set up not only that it goes to everyone, but that regardless of whether they are responding immediately to the emergency room or not, you can send it to whomever you desire. So like my trauma medical director, myself, and my registrar all receive all of the activations so that we can track them. The registrar actually receives them by email, which is very beneficial as well, because she can actually then, when she comes into work in the morning, take a look, see what was there, and see how many patients we should be expecting to have to obtain data on and start tracking. The other tracking piece of that as well is the physicians being able to say, well, I didn't receive that call, but you can actually go into the tracking mechanism and see when the call went out, when they clicked on it, when they responded to it, and it makes a great tracking device as well. It really does establish a great way of sending all of this information out. As I said, we decreased our response times quite drastically. The online paging is great for providing data, and it's not only data for our trauma activations, but it's information, whether it's from the nurses to the physicians, the residents to the physicians, or whatever, with data about patients that is totally HIPAA compliant, and they can say patient Smith has this going on right now. How do you want me to treat it? Or we had my trauma medical director was in another state at a conference a number of months ago, had a patient with a very bad wound, and they were able to send some photos so that he could adjust the wound care during that time. So there are tremendous advantages to the security of sending this data along the way. So you can reach everyone in a very rapid way, regardless of where they're located. And the other thing that's really a huge benefit for me is putting in the call schedule. It takes literally about 15 minutes to put in a call schedule with primary call, backup call, and we even have a group set up for our trauma intensivist so that our emergency or our ICU nurses have direct access to our intensivist at all times as well. And those changes can be made from everywhere. I had a surgeon call me 2 nights ago at 10 o'clock at night saying, I'm going to be covering for the other guy tomorrow morning for 2 hours. I could go into the software, put in those 2 hours specifically. It never took the other guy out. It just inserted him where he needed to be. So it's very, very effective that way. Startup was extremely easy. It took essentially 1 day to get our entire ER staff, the unit clerks, and the nurses used to using the drop downs and putting the information in online. And it was very, very quick and easy, very effective. And again, those drop downs really saved a lot of time and gave them, so they didn't have to worry about what to actually put there. And then adding that rounder, the intensivist call schedule for our ICU staff has given them a really great direct line for everything as well. So my takeaways are this is a great tool for tracking and measurement. It saves us time. It's effective and very efficient in getting the word out to a number of people at a large number of people at the same time. That confidentially of sending patient data, I just can't go beyond how valuable that aspect of it is. And then the ease of making those schedule changes and everything. It's just very, very easy to do. I can do it whether I'm in the next room or if I'm across the country. So it makes it really, really easy. So I love the product. We were pleased that we could use it. In addition to trauma, we also do use it for other groups, including our stroke team and our MI team. So it is used on multiple levels within our facility. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chris, who is at another nearby hospital, and we work together frequently. All right, Chris.
Well, thank you, Joanne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris McKeechin, as Leanne had introduced earlier. I'm Chris McKeechin. I currently work at the Henry Ford Macomb Hospital in Clinton Township, Michigan. So we're located in southeast Michigan. As Joanne is, we're just in an adjacent county. Our hospital is a community hospital, and we're part of a larger health system that has a level 1 in our downtown Detroit. We have a community partner in one of our suburbs, and then we have another community partner to the south. We call it downriver. So we have, 4 acute care hospitals and a variety of other urgent cares and other centers, like family practice centers. So our hospital itself is just under 400 beds. We have approximately 67,000 visits annually. So, we're busy just like everybody. We track or manage about 1,500 cases of injured patients annually, and that's kind of a soup to nuts, the sick, the most hurt, and folks that have isolated injuries that need to be managed by the trauma service. We are an American College of Surgeons verified level 2 adult trauma center. We're actually in our re-verification period, so we're in the process of developing our re-verification mantra, if you will. So again, fairly busy community hospital. We started on this journey about 6 years ago to become a trauma center. So having said that, when I kind of landed here in 2009, it was brand new. We were a community hospital that kind of wanted to take our hospital to the next level, provide improved care to the injured patient. So the bottom line is we had no process before we started developing our program. Historically, we had no standard methodology to get a hold of folks if it was more than one physician. It was a lot of the stuff that Mr. Edwards described earlier with I call two friends and so on. It was a lengthy process to even contact one person. So we thought that we needed to develop a better way to kind of mobilize a team and get them to the bedside in a more timely fashion. And we did need a way to reach different team members based upon our activation needs. So for our level 1 trauma activations, which are our highest activation level and our most hurt, which require a very large team response, we wanted to be able to contact those team members while the folks that we needed to mobilize for the level 2, because there are some folks that don't get notified on level 2. For example, our anesthesiologists don't get notified for level 2s. So, we didn't want them to have to get every single trauma activation that was going to go out. People tend to get alert fatigue that way, and it kind of becomes like a beeping noise in the background. So we had to kind of problem solve and figure out how we were going to approach that. And the other thing that we were kind of encumbered by at that point is the staff really liked the old way of doing things. And the old way of doing things here was an overhead page, which is hit and miss. If the surgeons were in the OR, they probably weren't going to hear it, or if a respiratory therapist was in the ICU providing a treatment, they weren't going to hear it. So it was the overhead page and then develop a page through just pagers and page it out as a group by the operator. So that was the conversation we initially had, and I was not a big fan of that. Just having gone through that in other institutions, that was kind of an outdated way. So we kind of had to think a little outside the box for that period in time because there weren't, we didn't know a lot of products that were out there that would allow us to do that. Turns out, PerfectServe did have a product for us. So what we did, we had already had that had been implemented here marginally, and I say marginally because it was a burgeoning process. So we were starting to use it to notify individual physicians. So what happened is I worked with one of our PerfectServe partners to develop an alert methodology and then a communication workflow process. So we set about mapping it out. We also developed hot pagers because there are some individuals on our call team that was their primary mode of being notified. Again, I use anesthesia as a prime example because they already had those hot pagers in existence. So it helped us with that for the folks where there was always a handoff for the anesthesiologist each day in the hospital. And then we identified primary devices for other team members. So for example, we weren't just relegated to the pagers. We could use cell phones, and our surgeons, that's what they use now. Their primary device that they're contacted on is their cell phone. And then we also developed the escalation methodology. If you didn't answer in the first 4 minutes, you get called again. So that took us some time. It took us about 4 or 5 months to execute by the time we identified all the team members who really need to be on the page, who was going to use what device, what number they were going to use. And so again, since it was a brand new program and thought process, it did take a little bit of time for us to put it together because we were putting the bricks in the road to become a trauma center. So now the way it mapped out was our trauma information is received. So not unlike Joanne's institution, we get folks who come in through triage. We get folks who are called on the EMS radio. So what happens is once the nurse, and it's a nurse who makes the decision for call out, we do allow some of our paramedics who answer the radio to make that decision as well because we have a defined set of criteria to do that. They make the decision to call a level 1 or a level 2. Then at the time, so we're kind of using an older model. This is one of the earlier iterations, and it's worked well for us. So we decided that we had a constant. Our health unit coordinator was the constant, who's always at the desk, who could be handed, she's handed a standardized set of information that's collected, not dissimilar to what Joanne's institution collects. You know, blood pressure, pulse, respirations, what the injury is. Then he or she calls a number. We have a specific number they call. They leave a voicemail. There are some of us that get the voicemail message and some folks that just get the alert. There were some folks that were like, I don't need to know the details. I just need to know that I need to respond. So that's kind of how we ended up where we were at. We felt that the surgeons needed to know what they were responding to. So they, when they're on call, they get the voicemail and they listen to it. We also get an email. Our registrar gets an email. I get an email. I also get all of the alerts just like Joanne does so that we can kind of figure out, okay, who we need to look at. And I got to tell you, the email works great for us from a tracking for the registrar. Not a dissimilar process to the Providence folks who use it to say, oh, well, we should have 10 activations that we got to find our paperwork and identify, you know, were they admitted or not. And our activations are tracked and monitored in a similar fashion. So that's one of the things, because we've had situations, as Joanne articulated, the doc's like, well, I never got the page. You can go in and you can check that. And, you know, I've been able to say, well, according to the software application, it shows that you acknowledge the page within a minute. So again, very useful from that perspective. So, and I know it's a little hard to see on the screen right now, but this is the workflow process we developed. So really kind of the straight line, you know, who's on our team, how do we call it out, who gets what. And we still use that now. There have been some modifications over time, just as anyone has, but this is this original workflow that we mapped out. And again, a much more straight up, straight down process than we historically had. So what ended up, or what we ended up with, was a standardized process for trauma alerts that, again, really wasn't in place before, and folks, you know, relied on an overhead page or a page of their pagers and so on. Well, now we have this standardized process that we knew was a go-to. Now, that's not that there weren't some challenges initially. So, you know, initially we did have, you know, we had transposed pager numbers. We had to fix that. You know, I argue that that happens no matter what you do. And now, you know, the right folks get the right page at the right time. And it does, as Joanne already articulated and has been mentioned, we also do track the activations and use it for quality improvement. So, for example, with us, since we still have a voicemail, we actually play the voicemail on some of our mass casualty cases where they'll do a call out and give us all the patients so that we can determine whether we stratified them correctly, things like that. So that's been very useful to us, and it also helps us with the tracking for response to the bedside. And the other thing that's kind of nice that to me was I guess I didn't expect this result. The updating of devices isn't particularly hard. Let's say you have someone leave, they don't want their device on there anymore. You literally call the PerfectServe folks and say, okay, take this device off. Okay, it'll take us a little bit, but we'll get it off. We'll make sure they don't get paged again. You know, so that was something I'm not used to. You know, when you update a pager list, that's kind of fraught with peril when you're trying to coordinate it with your operators and things like that. This is a much easier process, and we found that was one of the results. We also use it as our source of truth for who's on call. So as Joanne mentioned, you put in your schedule, and it literally, if it takes 15 minutes, I don't even know if it takes that long. You know, it's harder to get the guys to agree on what days they're going to take call on than it ever does to put it into the computer. And PerfectServe does automatically recognize that, and we also use it for, like I said, source of truth when we're generating pay for our folks, things like that. So it's been very useful for that as well. And the other result is it's really ingrained in the culture now. So I can honestly say I've not had anybody say, oh, can we go back to the overhead paging methodology? You know, at first people do the whole, you know, kick your heels in the dirt because it's different, but it really is a cultural thing now. And, you know, we probably need to look at where we can take it next, but we've been in that it's working very well for us, so, we'll stay the course. So some of the lessons that we learned as we developed this process, because anything new is not, necessarily easy because it's different. So we did have to be kind of persistent. Folks were reticent at first, like I said, because they were used to the old way of doing things. And so folks were kind of doing okay, we'll believe it when it happens. So the other thing with that is there was a learning curve initially, and there was a little bit of a learning curve on how to have the HUC call the information out. And although we had a lot of support from the PerfectServe folks, actually Brian Meyer helped us a lot with that when we first started, on how to pick up and respond to the messages. So there was, because again, it was different and it was, a newer thing, folks had to learn that, so it took us a little bit of time, because that is where we did struggle a little bit. Folks were forgetting their PIN to get their message, so we had to kind of re-educate. But now, again, they're used to it, and it's not a big deal. The other thing that we did, of course, learn, because there were some things where like, okay, we don't need everybody, because, you're starting a new trauma program. Everybody in the world wants to be notified and be on the list for trauma activations. So that was another lesson learned that kind of also caused us to adapt our processes. If you need to, you can. And that is the advantage of PerfectServe when it comes to that part of it. You identify, that didn't work so well. How do we want to slice this pie? And you can kind of adapt your process based upon your gaps that you identify. And I find that to be easier than it is with other products that I've used for, other things. So I would say that that's been certainly beneficial from our perspective. So some of the key takeaways we got from this was now, our trauma activation process, works pretty effectively and fairly efficiently. We do get some folks that say, it took 10 minutes to get the page, for me, that's hard. I think maybe they were busy because you can see that it all went out at the same time. But it's still effective. So for example, our response times, we very seldom, for our level 1s and level 2s, very seldom are our physicians not at the bedside in the time that we've prescribed because they've gotten the notification. And if they're not, it's probably because they're in the OR and can't break scrub right away and the resident's already there because they've gotten the page. So that's usually the reason. So the other thing, I think Joanne mentioned some of the process that they use, but as part of this movement forward, one of our other key takeaways is that secure physician-to-physician texting option that we've kind of adapted to aid in more efficient patient care. It really is a nice way for them. They can actually, like the surgeons when they do handoff, if they're busy, they can text each other about the patients, and it's secure. You don't have to worry about that. So we did also adopt that, and that became a takeaway of our process. The ability to view the acknowledgement of the messages received. It's helpful for tracking and management, as I already mentioned. And the other thing for us, our key takeaway, because the technology is evolving, we may actually move to the online paging in the future because it is a nice product. Like I said, we're right now in the older kind of version because it's worked so well for us and it's so ingrained in our culture. But because of how this has worked out and evolved over time, folks don't even blink now when we say, we're going to do this, or, we need to do this and add it to PerfectServe. So that part has become much easier to kind of evolve our processes through the software application. So I also, like I said, I'm pleased with the product. You get challenges anytime you do anything, and I've kind of articulated some of those. So we certainly appreciate the ability to use this product and provide a more timely, efficient care to our injured patients. So on that note, I will hand it back over to Leanne.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Chris and Joanne, for sharing your story. That was wonderful. I do want to take just a moment and show you some of the data for both organizations before we jump into question and answer. This chart shows the activations that took place at Providence in 2014. You can see the increased usage as processes became more efficient. This is the data that PerfectServe captures regarding team alerts and can easily provide at any time. And it was mentioned that this helps with their monitoring and their registry work. Respectively, here are the activations at Henry Ford over the last year as well. These next two slides show the recipients and the level of alert communications. Again, this data is helpful for program managers to have access to for planning and management of their centers. And at this time, we'd like to begin the question and answer portion of today's event. We've had several questions come in already, a couple for Terry, but many for you. Chris and Joanne and I will go ahead and get started with those. So for Joanne and or Chris, so Joanne, why don't we start with you and then we'll let Chris weigh in. Were you able to track specific quality or response metrics on a before and after basis?
Well, this is Joanne. For us, the biggest change was when we were tracking the timing from when the alert was received or when the radio call was received in the ER to when it got to the physicians, when we switched from the operator to the operating burst pages to the PerfectServe process. As far as other quality metrics, that is pretty much by how quickly the surgeons respond. If we have an occurrence where an emergency physician or we get data the next morning when we come in that says, the trauma surgeon took an hour to show up, then we can actually look and talk to look at the tracking device, see when the call went out, when they acknowledged it on their device, and then we have data for that in that way to address that physician and go, look, you know what our parameters are. This is what you need to do, and we need to see this improve in order for you to remain on the call schedule. So I know that's one way that we use it, that we use our tracking on it. And then, like I said, the other was just that we don't track any longer, but was how rapidly the actual activations were going out to the people that they needed to get to. Chris, how about you?
I think, since our version is a little bit, like how we go about it is a little bit different and, like I said, an older iteration, the most helpful thing we do use it for is the response metrics. Now, on a before and after, we didn't really have a before, so I don't have that from a context because, like I said, we decided our decision point was PerfectServe's up and running. Now we're going to start our trauma activations for the team alerts. But I can tell you that we use the trauma call-out time from PerfectServe as the time start for the surgeon response time. And then we use Epic as our EMR. So, and when the nurses arrive, the surgeon in Epic, that's how we track their arrival time. So we really do use it very much so for the response metrics. Other specific quality metrics, that's harder for us to track right now because, they're texting amongst each other for the patient handoffs and things like that are more for them to do. But we would be challenged to do our response times without it. And for the college now with the verification process, for those of you that are interested in if you're not already a verified trauma center, that makes that piece easier, especially now that we have to track 1s, 2s, and trauma evaluations for the response times.
Great, thank you very much. Terry, the next question is for you, and the question is, can PerfectServe use Dragon so a physician can respond with voice?
The way the physician responds or acknowledges that the alert goes out, and depending on how it was initiated and how the physician is retrieving it, it will either be sent as a text message or as a voice message. And so the need to respond depends on whether the doctor feels like he or she needs to initiate a call back. And I believe in most of these applications, and Chris and Joanne, you can verify this, the response is actually getting in to care for the patient unless they have a question. So should they have a question, the response would end up being a live phone call versus like a message itself. And they automatically acknowledge that they've retrieved the message when they either read it or listen to it.
That's correct. And that is a big advantage to part of the tracking piece of it. And most of the time the responses back are by a phone call, whether it's back to a physician, back to the emergency room, back returning it to a nurse. But we use it a lot for texting back and forth between the resident and the attendings with information as well.
Yeah, I would say that's been our experience as well.
When a doctor does retrieve, or when he or she is retrieving a message, they can record a message if they don't want to text it. But it doesn't work specifically with Dragon on a mobile device. And mainly we just haven't seen the use case for it, at least not yet.
Great, thanks everybody. Next question is for Joanne and Chris. Chris, why don't you answer first and then Joanne. What was the single most difficult part of making a new process change happen in your organization? It's a loaded question, isn't it?
It's a loaded question. That would be for sure. It's not like anything else. I think the single most, but if I had to pinpoint one thing, it's that old, well, not old, but old now, technology is great when it works kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? I think that's because people were very skeptical. So if I had to pick one thing that I had to spend, how do we know I spent a lot of days saying, how do we know if we don't try it? How do we know if we don't try it? It kind of became like a broken record because it was the technology piece. Most folks were convinced the pages were not going to go through. So if I had to pick a singular thing, that was it. And so I finally did have to say, here's the deal I'll make with all of you, all the folks that will be part of the response team. We're going to try it for 3 months. You do that whole quarter. We're going to give it a quarter, shot and see how it goes. If we can't figure out who's getting paged, people aren't responding, they're not getting their pages, we will reevaluate it. Well, let's just say we didn't have to do that because it became a non-issue. Other than an occasional, I didn't get my page and I found out they did. Once we got past that, then it did become a lot easier for folks to accept that it was going to work as we said it was going to work.
Right. Change is hard for folks. Joanne, do you have anything that you want to add or a different point?
I would say that's probably was similar for us. For us, it was a little bit easier because there were so many problems with the old system, with missing activations and missing calls from people, with so many dead areas. Our biggest challenge of it was really just to getting everybody's phone numbers and getting everybody to say, yes, I'll do it on my cell phone, instead of having to rely on pagers that didn't work in a lot of areas like the OR. So it was, for us, it was a little bit different, but still the similar type things. They didn't have quite as much animosity toward it, but so it was a little bit quicker and easier, but they were a little leery as well about whether it would work. And it was the same thing for us. It's like, let's just do this because we know the other isn't working. So if it doesn't work, then we'll go toward another direction. And we never had to.
Change management.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you, ladies. The next question is for you, Terry. What kind of device is needed to receive the PerfectServe alerts? So I'm going to combine a couple questions, Terry, so I can break it out for you, but I'll go ahead and ask it all at once. So what kind of device is needed to receive the PerfectServe alerts? Can the physicians use their own phones? We worry about what kind of information they may be receiving on their personal devices.
Okay, so several things in those three questions. So let's first talk about the devices. PerfectServe as a platform is really device agnostic, and we can enable communication processes where the initiation can come from the phone, a regular phone, our voice interface, the web, our mobile interface, or a third-party system. In these two examples that we talked about today, Joanne at St. John Providence is using the web to initiate, and Chris's team at Henry Ford are using the voice interface to initiate. Now, how those communications then are received could be one of three primary ways. The first category is that it could result in a live phone call being placed to the physician, and that phone call could be where the initiator and the receiver are then talking in real time, or it could be where a message is delivered and the doctor's phone rings and then they listen to that message. The second method would be as a secure message, which is accessed on the PerfectServe platform. And as a secure message, we have really enabled a HIPAA-compliant process to deliver that message, but we also have the ability to monitor when those messages are retrieved, and we can escalate notification accordingly. We heard Joanne and Chris talk about that, and the notification escalation procedure for a trauma alert can be different than one for another communication, say a notification from a med-surg floor, which may not be as critical. Those types of messages can be accessed on the mobile application that we provide end users with, or by dialing into the system, or via signing in over the web. The mobile app is really becoming the user interface of choice for most of our clinicians. And then the third method is a one-way notification, and this would be an alphanumeric page or a numeric page or an SMS to a cell phone. So those are the different methods. So the second question you asked was, can this work with a physician's own device? Yes, most of our doctors are using their own device, and then some are hospital supplied, just depends on the person. But again, this goes back to PerfectServe being device agnostic. Our mobile app is optimized for iOS and Android only. We are only supporting those two operating systems at this time. And then the third question was really around security of information. And as a platform, we've designed and engineered the PerfectServe platform so that it can secure all communication processes, not just text messaging. So we're really going beyond text messaging, which is critical for most health systems. So what that means is that we can enable a process where we can control the delivery and access to PHI based upon the process and how it's defined, who the users are, as well as the contact methods themselves. So, for example, when I talked earlier about secure messages that might be accessed via the mobile application, we can deliver to those end users very rich content messages because we know they're secure and we can audit the access. Whereas with a alphanumeric page, for example, or just a regular SMS message, we can't really control it. We can't lock it down. And so this enables health systems to say, okay, if the contact method is going to be one of these unsecure modalities, then we want to remove or filter out the PHI. And so that's how we control it. And this is something that's controlled at the hospital or health system organizational level, not just at the individual user level.
Great, thanks, Terry. And I'm going to go ahead and just take one more question that came in while you were talking on it, because it's more technical in nature. Can it be hosted locally, or is it a SaaS-only application?
No, PerfectServe is a SaaS-only application, and that that's really critical. And it's not just SaaS, but it's a cloud-based architecture. And that's critical because the clinicians who are receiving these communications, may or may not be, we're dealing with organizations that aren't just employed users. So we have users that are working across organizational boundaries. And so our architecture really optimizes for that, so that if you're a physician, for example, and even in this example in Detroit, with St. John Providence and Henry Ford, as a physician, for example, I only have one solution, even if I'm practicing in both of those facilities. So it helps drive and maximize adoption to use that kind of architecture.
Great, thanks. Next question, we're getting pretty close to wrapping up here, but it's for Joanne and Chris. How did you go about determining the right folks for each alert? At our organization, we struggle because often everybody, sometimes unnecessarily, want to be included on the notification or vice versa. And I know that you all touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can expand a bit?
Sure. Joanne, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Chris. You start.
Okay, so that's a great question, and I'm not going to lie, we do still struggle with that. So here's a disadvantage we sometimes have. Some of the folks will just call PerfectServe and have themselves added, and then I'll find out they're added. I'm like, okay, how many people do we really need to be alerted? We actually, to be quite frank, there were a couple folks, so this is kind of how I approached it though when we first did it. I'm like, fine, you can all be on the application. Be careful. I had to finally take the approach, be careful what you wish for. Because here's the advantage of that. You can add how many people you want, and the page goes out anyway. So what we found is that when their pager was going off, they would call me and say, can you please just take me off? So some folks, because they were persistent, that's what I ended up doing, and I wasn't trying to be passive aggressive. I just wanted them to know that be careful what you wish for, because they were that persistent. Once I explained to some folks, so some of it took an explanation to some folks, look, you're going to get pages day and night. Do you really feel like you need them? If you're not physically responding to the trauma, do you really need them? So then we actually, in our trauma operations group 1 meeting, actually finally went through the list of folks and came to an agreement who should and shouldn't be called. Because we did struggle with that at first. And like I said, still sometimes find out folks kind of added themselves and they probably didn't need to. So I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I had to go through multiple layers to finally get the list pared down to what we thought was a manageable list of people that really, really needed to be notified. And it took our operations committee to do it.
For us, it was, we made the determination on who was going to be on it initially. We had a few directors at, again, one of our trauma operations in a leadership meeting who said they wanted to receive them initially as well, just to kind of see what the trend was. It did not take very long for them to come back off. And but with ours, the only way that people can be added to them is if I okay it and I add them. That is one stipulation that we had, is that is controlled totally by the trauma program manager, that we determine who actually gets them and who does not.
Great, thank you. So that does bring us really right up to the top of the hour. Before we conclude the question and answer portion, we do have a question for you, our attendees. If you would like additional information about how PerfectServe can incorporate team alerts not only into your trauma center, but many other type of alerting processes, or streamline clinical communications in your organization, please let us know by using the poll on your screen. And again, today we really appreciate all of the great questions. This is always our favorite part of our webinars. If we didn't get to yours, or you'd like to contact our speakers directly, their respective email addresses are on the screen now. If you enjoyed today's webinar, here's a look at our calendar of future events. These webinars are always free, and links to register can be found at the PerfectServe.com website by clicking on the Knowledge Center tab. Chris and Joanne, I'd like to sincerely thank you for sharing your stories with us today. It's always great to hear best practices from some of our member and client hospitals. And I'd also like to thank our audience for taking time to join us today. Please take a moment and tell us how we did, and have a great afternoon. Thank you again, Chris and Joanne and Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude our webinar for today. You may now disconnect.